Going back to the macro stuff,
Yep.
When you talked about double-digit down on bonds and equities, do you see a recovery, or is this just a death spiral?
A recovery in bond prices?
But either.
Okay, so absolutely. I mean, look, bonds have now gone from a 1.5% US 10-year to close to 4%. You know, it topped out at higher than 4%.
By the way, is that actually a good thing? Should bond rates really be at that
They
rate?
always should, yes. And they're still not high enough.
Right.
Because you still have nominal yields after you subtract out your CPI.
You have your real
negative
yields,
real rates. That being said, there's an element, and I said this on stage here in the conference, that people are going to change from being worried about inflation to being worried about credit risk of the USA. And that's what an interest rate is. It incorporates an inflation expectation and a concern about credit risk. And up until now, nobody in the world has worried about the potential default of the USA. But guess what? And I saw the chart you had there, the graph of the Congressional Budget Office that showed the deficit in the USA, that graph right there.
Keep it up, Danny.
It is a beautiful, if this was a company, you wouldn't touch this thing, okay? Right. This is so ugly.
Foss,
you look at this.
Explain this to people listening on the phone.
So the primary deficit, okay? The components of the total deficit is the combination of the purple and the blue. But the primary deficit is your fixed costs. It's your military spending and it's your entitlements. Yep. And correct me if you see something else here,
and others, okay. Right? So those are the ones you just listed are mandatories. They're under legislation, but
this is the government budget.
This is the government, and it's done by the Congressional Budget Office,
which means that it's quite optimistic.
Doesn't matter. It's still so pathetic.
Which is pathetic.
Is that you are going to have a total deficit in 2051, okay?
What's that, 15 trillion?
This is, no, it's how much on an annual basis you are losing. You are correct. It's $15 trillion negative.
It's not a percent, it's an actual number.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is this accumulating every year? Or is this
don't forget, when you don't pay off last year's, you have to pay interest on it, and it gets bigger.
But that's not the number each year. That's the increase.
No, that's the number. That's the total deficit. Well, that's the increase.
So they're increasing. So why is it going to
deficit as a percentage of GDP for the USA? You're getting a deficit that's 15% of the GDP of the USA annually, and the biggest component is your net interest, which is because the interest coupon has to roll over and fund the deficit from the prior year. So it's organically growing because of the debt spiral.
So let's talk about that for a second. So this is a great chart because it shows that the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, admits the problem.
Yeah.
But let's talk through the real problem, right? So going back to what Greg was saying, so you've got your GDP, right? We're already
one second, James. I just want to explain to the people listening just what we're looking at, and we'll put it in the show notes. But essentially, what we're seeing is the deficit year by year. We have an anomaly in 2020 and 21 because of COVID, I imagine.
Correct. That's exactly
so there's a massive
what
amount of borrowing, and then what we see is going to drop back in 2022 to about 5%.
Correct.
Okay, and then
GDP. Now let's
GDP.
Right.
Okay, and then from 2027. It's gonna be about the same, but it's gonna go up to about 15% by 2051. But the majority of the increase is interest.
It's ridiculous. All right, so let's just walk through how it's ridiculous. Right now, first of all, our baseline deficit right now is $1 trillion.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's walk through the numbers really quickly for your listeners to understand what Greg is talking about. And we talked about this, and that's why I wrote that newsletter about the debt spiral in the United States. Right.
Yes.
So. Okay, so you have your major revenue source. That's your taxes. I mean, they have other things, their penalties and stuff like that, but your tax revenue is your major source of income for the United States. Okay, and that's driven off of your GDP, your gross domestic product, right? So and that right now is running at about $4.5 trillion. Oh, no, I'm sorry,
That's okay. 4.5 trillion is your tax revenue.
Right. All right. So you've got your major expenditures are your entitlements, Okay, these are signed into legislation. These are mandatory expenses, right? Which is about
Social Security?
Social
Yeah,
Security,
Social
Medicare,
Security, Medicaid, yeah.
right? And that's $3.7 trillion. Then
Hold on, what's GDP of?
GDP of the USA about 24 trillion.
And tax revenues are about
4 trillion.
4 trillion, 4.5 trillion.
So hold on. So 2.7 trillion of that is mandatory.
Correct.
Does that include the military?
No,
3.7.
800.
So let me walk through it. So it's $3.7 trillion is mandatory. Then out of your variable expenses that change year to year, you've got military, okay, which is $800 billion. But those are contracts. So you kind of count it as a mandatory because they're invoices that they're getting from these contractors that they've agreed to, make these defense products for them, right? Or defense systems. So then that's 800, right? Then your current interest on your debt is at $400 billion. Okay. So now walk that back. So the number is actually $4.8 trillion of revenue. Okay. You've got 3.7 trillion in entitlements, 800 in defense. Now you're at 4.5. Then you've got $300 billion left over for interest expense. However, today your interest expense is at $400 billion. So you're already running an additional deficit of $100 billion, okay? Now, Larry Lepard and I sat down before this conference and talked through a pro forma of next year. So a pro forma is just a projection on your baseline. So, okay, remember, your total, if you include everything, so forget about the mandatory only. If you include everything, we're running right now at about $1 trillion of deficit, right? But now next year, if you peel out from our revenues the $600 billion that we got, which was kind of a one-time deal in 2020 after all of the money printing and the stock market, all the assets went up. They had a great capital gains revenue line item of about $600 billion of additional, right? So pull that out. And then also we have right now about $400 billion of additional spending that the government the Treasury has said that they're going to have to issue bonds at going into the fourth quarter, into the first quarter. Okay. So now you've got the 600 plus that 400 plus another $150 billion of the COLA, the cost of living adjustment on those entitlements, right? So that goes up by another $150 billion. So you're about at another $1.2 trillion. Add that to the $1 trillion deficit you're already at. That's $2.2 trillion, okay? Now hold that, right? So clearly, okay, we'll go back to that in a second, but then when you add in that we're going into a recession, and the last two great recessions we were in, which was a tech bubble in 2000 and 2008 was the great financial crisis, your tax revenues dropped between 8 and 10%, and your entitlement spending went up between 8 and 10%. So now that's all another $800 billion to $1 trillion, okay? On top of that $2.2 trillion, if we go into this downward economic spiral, or at least into a hard recession. So now you're at over $3 trillion. Now look at the chart and see how rosy that picture is from the CBO. Even though, okay, so if you look at 2026, it's showing what? 5% as a percentage of GDP. Remember, GDP is $24 trillion.
So 5% is 1 trillion.
And that's going down.
Okay, so this is bullshit.
Well, but it's still so ugly.
It's still so ugly.
If this was a company, you would never touch this with a large pool.
Exactly.
But the thing is, if this was my household budget, what I would be doing is going, I've got to cut something out.
No, what you do is if you're
or
the
get
US
a second
government,
job.
if you're this is what the U.S. government is doing. Okay, if they're assuming yes, exactly what you just said, but instead of cutting spending or getting a second job, they can't get a second job. Where are they going to drive revenue from? Instead of what they're doing is they're operating on credit. So they've got a credit card that they're overspent on, and they've got an interest rate on it. So now their mandatory expenses of your mortgage and your car payment and food, right? So you've got all those things you've got to pay for you and your kids. Well, you're not meeting that margin with your job, with your revenue. So you can't cut out you're not cutting out food, your mortgage, or your house. So what are you going to do? You're going to take out another credit card. And then you're going to pay the interest on that credit card. And then eventually you're paying so much in interest that you have to take another credit
There's
card.
your blue line.
And that's the blue line.
That's your net interest. And that's what, so it's the equivalent of being in credit card hell. Okay.
It's a debt spiral.
You are taking out more credit cards to pay the interest on your old credit cards.
And this is why there will be a default at some point.
Or
gets to what, you know,
they print a load of more.
Thank you very much. The fiat currency is the error term, which balances this debt spiral.
So they print out, pays back in normal terms, loses
print to oblivion.
As long as it continues going.
Does that affect credit rating though?
Okay, absolutely it does. But that's why the credit rating
question.
Companies are conflicted. If this was a corporation, there is no question it would be rated triple C. Okay? It's a very simple calculation on EBITDA interest coverage. And the USA does not even cover its interest expense by one turn. James ran through the math, which meant that as a company, those are defined as zombie companies. Well, guess what? The USA is a zombie country, and it's the best country in the world from a financial perspective.
Yeah. There were times where we would run a surplus, and there were times where we would run a deficit. And it just feels like we never have a surplus anymore.
Okay, why? Because your organic growth in your debt is at a point where the growth in your interest is outstripping the possible growth of your economy.
But why is it happening now and not? And I've got a couple of theories. I think one is globalization. I think who's going to blink first?
No, Paul Volcker was able to do what he did because total debt to GDP in the USA at the end of 1988 was 30%. And now total debt to GDP in the USA is 130%.
But why have we got there
so
now?
think about it. So just think about it. If your interest rates are going up, right, and you're running a deficit, well, now your interest payments they're getting bigger. So each year that your deficit is growing, and
just
so
by
that's the problem.
growth.
It's just math, right? So think about it. So now you've got $31 trillion of debt in the United States right now, right? So if your interest rate, which is why the Treasury is like they're on guard here.
Yeah.
So you got $31 trillion up there on the left, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got right now, if they're paying, what did we come up with?
It was 1.5%. They're funding themselves at 1.5%. Make the math easy. On 31 trillion, they have $450 billion annually of debt, right? Peter, look at the top, 30 trillion times 1.5%. That's 450 billion annually, which James pointed out. 38% of that debt rolls over in the next 2 years and will be funded at a 4% coupon because that's the open market rate on debt now.
Okay.
So there is the growth in your interest expense.
Right.
You go from a 450 billion to meaningfully higher because the debt rolls at a much higher coupon.
Hold on, question.
Yes.
I think I've just realized something that I hadn't fully realized before. When you just said the debt rolls over,
Yeah.
because they have to pay off the old bonds, they have to issue. They have to issue the new ones to roll it over.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
Now here, one thing I want to mention.
Over from
I
want to mention this,
1.3 to
Danny.
1.5% to
Peter,
4.5.
Here's how crazy it is. Everyone focuses on the U.S. national debt in the top left corner.
I'm looking at US total debt.
Where do you see that one?
93. Oh, fuck.
No, go down to the bottom
All the way
line.
down.
Holy
US
shit.
unfunded liabilities, 170 trillion.
Hold on. We nearly need
So
a
add
new.
that to the 31.
What comes after trillions? Is it quadrillion?
It is. But let's not even go there because that's $200 trillion. You take your unfunded here, 172 plus 30, you're at $200 trillion of total obligations by the U.S.
Hold on. Okay. So say $200 trillion. What are those unfunded liabilities?
Medicare and Medicaid. It's right there. You see them right there. Medicare liability, Social Security liability.
But over what period?
It's on their books now. It's the promises to the citizens going forward.
Yeah, but
30 years?
Okay, 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Shit.
No, but this is math.
This is and
This is the math.
and this is why you need inflation to.
It's over.
But go down to the lower right. See what the liability per citizen is?
Fucking insane.
It's not funny though. These are our kids, Peter.
No. But,
Yeah.
but it's so fucking stupid.
It
It's
is
funny.
exactly that.
It's
Now,
like
you said,
insane.
how did we get here?
Yeah.
Any 4-year president that's going to try and fix this will not be in office for another term.
Well,
So he is not incented to fix this. It's besides it being mathematically impossible to fix.
Unless they elect a guy who probably won't be alive by the end of it, and then maybe he can have a go.
We've had enough people that shouldn't be in office
now
at that
go-
age anyway. But
Go back up just a couple of lines. You see
Jesus
the U.S. millionaires down there? You see the number of millionaires?
22 million.
There's 22 million millionaires. How many Bitcoin are there going to be ever printed?
21. This is a great chart, and they do this by country, right? You can look at this same thing for Canada. Let's not do it.
They will not
22
all
and
be
a
able
half.
to get one.
22,
not
actually, right,
mathematically not possible.
23 millionaires.
Yeah. Just here in the United States.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
There's
Hold on, that's
There's
more than
50
5%.
something. Yeah, 50 something in the world.
Yeah, close to, it's probably 7%. So if there's 300 million people, 7% times 300 is 21 million.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
This stuff is insane.
It's math. This is why it's so simple to see this. And then we could get into the credit default swap market, and you could see how Bitcoin, even just on the United States, should be valued at somewhere close to $200,000 just because of the insurance on the USA. And then you get all the other countries for free.
What does it used to say? Bitcoin is a credit default swap on. Used to say something.
On a basket of fiat currencies,
Yeah.
but you could just do it as a credit default swap on the USA and see how cheap Bitcoin is.
Oh my God.
But you see, here's the cool thing,
okay.
Peter.
Yeah.
We've been involved, you and I, talking about this, and I love the aha moment. You just had your aha moment.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's certain concepts you just suddenly get.
That's
you know.
fine, but you have to keep
Yeah.
repeating it because
Yeah.
most people don't. It's like when you, James very well did.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
One that stands out to me: savings per family,
Yeah,
9,500.
9,500 versus the liability per citizen.
Not good.
500. So what's the average family in the USA? 4. So the average family has $2 million of liability, and the savings for family, a whole $9,500.
I'd love to see a UK version of this.
There is a UK
It's
version.
there.
There is?
Yeah.
Oh my God, let's have a look.
You get your public debt to GDP 104% versus USA. Well, that's the public debt, but you got to take your
Well, the
total
UK
funding.
just jumped over 100% this year.
Yeah. But these are cool. I mean, but it's not a good scenario. And the best scenario is the USA.
Oh, look at it. Italy's fucked.
No, well, that's why we always said
Oh,
it.
God, yeah.
But let's not spend too much time on it. It's that simple. You need insurance against this.
There's no way back.
Mathematically, no.